was crying out to God why he had abandoned me. There was a picture of Jesus on her nightstand, and I grabbed that picture and I began to punch it until my knuckles split and blood came out everywhere.
This is Touched by Heaven. Everyday encounters with God, those moments when heaven and earth collide and we see God. We see his hand reaching out to us, attempting to get our attention, inviting us into a closer relationship. Here we share stories of encounter with angels, divine intervention, prophetic dreams, visions, near-death experiences, big and little God incidents. I'm your host, Trapper Jack. Welcome, episode 145, God's response to angry prayers. Would you say Rob here was a little angry? A fist to the face of Jesus' blood? I'd call that an angry prayer. That was a prayer. That was an acknowledgement that God is real, that he's perfect, and he was doing absolutely nothing with Rob's problem. Rob was angry. Rob was angry, and God was doing nothing. He was getting crickets. He's praying. He was being persistent, like the Bible says, and he was getting nothing to a major problem that he and his wife had been praying about. Nothing. Been there? Maybe not to that degree with a fist, but think about, just call to mind that prayer that you have said, maybe still in the mode of saying, persevering, and you're getting crickets. You're praying and you're praying. Why is he doing nothing with this? Why is that? This brings me to a song that bubbled up yesterday. Again, how many times have I said this? Songs bubble up in my head seemingly out of nowhere, and we know where that nowhere is. Well, I woke up yesterday morning, and there was the song. It's a John Lennon song, Across the Universe. And again, we don't care that much about what the song initially was about. We care about the spiritualizing of the lyrics, and what do we get? We get God speaking to you and me. The song starts with words pouring out across the universe. Okay, spiritualize the word, right? The Word made flesh, the Word that was with God, the Word that was God. Okay, the Word pouring out across the universe. That's good. Next comes, nothing's going to change my world. How's that? Nothing. This is God speaking again. Nothing's going to change my world. I'm not changing. I have nothing to change in me. I am perfect as I was in the beginning, am now, and ever will be. I don't need to change a thing. Can you say the same? So he looks at us and goes, what about you? And sometimes in that seeming nothingness that he's doing, he's attempting to give us the grace, the knowledge that I can change. There are the things that I need to change in me, how I look at something, how I look at that situation. Is there something I need to change? My perspective, my heart. Is he trying to soften my heart about something? Okay. All right, next part of the lyric, interesting. Images of broken light. Taking me across the universe. That's interesting because going to Rob Gentile and his story and that prayer that begins with a fist has an experience with light, little pieces of light. He'll explain. He's a science kind of guy. He's written a book about all this, and this story is just got so many pieces and parts to it. But he's calling his book "Quarks of Light." Quarks. I know you've read all the articles there are about quarks, and you've probably read all the books about quarks. So I don't need to explain to you what a quark is. Heavens, no. But just in case, it's a subatomic particle. It's associated with light. Anyway, he'll explain his experience and why he's calling his book that. But anyway, so we go to these images of broken light, and that brings us back again. Oh, some more of the lyric has to do with limitless, undying love shining down upon us. That would be God, our perfect God, responding to our angry prayers. For Rob, he was going along just fine with God for most of his life, and then there was this falling out.
Big time falling out with God. My only child, Maria Grace, is 24 now, and when she was born, she was completely normal. But around 18 months, very strange things began to happen to Maria. Long story short is that Maria has a very rare diagnosis of Rett syndrome. It's a lot of nasty things rolled into one. It's severe autism, cerebral palsy, seizure disorder. She can't talk, walk, feed herself, and it's neurodegenerative in the brain. So along the way, and I've thought I was always a man of faith, but along the way, as this disease progressed and we went through a lot of hard times, lost everything, spent our entire everything that my wife and I had earned our retirements, everything, trying to find a cure for Maria. We had tried, my wife's a pharmacist, and she had gotten into integrative medicine. We've tried holistic medicine. I took Maria to every healer that I could possibly take to, went down some very dark paths. And I found myself at my wit's end when the doctors failed in Los Angeles. I had, I guess, what I would call a breakdown. I had taken Maria to a quote-unquote saint, someone that said he could heal these children. And we took Maria there in Santa Monica, and he blessed her and put some holy oil on her forehead and said, by morning she'll be talking. God's going to heal her. So when that didn't happen, a rage boiled up inside me that I had never felt before. It felt like I was having a heart attack, and the next morning, when she wasn't healed and she didn't talk, but by evening she had become just completely wild and uncontrollable. At that point, Maria was still, she was about 8, 9 years old. She had become a skeleton, passing Whole Foods, banging her head on the floor. We had to shave her head. She was just this short-circuiting robot that was just horrifying to see. And I had put her on my chest that night to try to calm her down, and I was holding her, and I was crying out to God to why He had abandoned me. There was a picture of Jesus on her nightstand, and I grabbed that picture and I began to punch it until my knuckles split, and blood came out everywhere. And I had given her to my wife to hold when the sun came up, and I ran down to the beach. We were only, I think, about a quarter of a mile from the ocean back then, and I found myself on the beach screaming out to God, cursing God, that He had abandoned me, crucified my daughter, and that I was done with Him.
Yours is 1,000 times the story I'd heard recently about the woman whose husband was in a hospital for a long, long time, and she was so angry and just so upset. And she goes outside. It was a Catholic hospital, and there's a big statue of Blessed Mother, and she walks over to it, and she just reaches down into the garden, into the dirt, and just starts throwing dirt clods at Mary. And some security people came running over to stop her, and a nun stopped the security guards and said, no, she's praying. In your own way, you were communicating with Jesus. You were saying something to Jesus. That is prayer. Upset, but you were in your own way crying out, praying, angry at Him. Why didn't you fix this? True?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it became vulgar. I mean, I screamed out, when I see you, I'll spit in your face, and the whole thing. But what became a prayer then turned into, and this is where my life became unhinged, is when I cried out that any force in the universe that could heal Maria, come to me now. And when that happened, however it is, and whatever anyone wants to call it, Satan, darkness, the dark one, Lucifer, whatever, did come in and took hold of me. So I went through a very, very, very dark period in my life of actually trying to heal Maria myself. I went down the road of energy healers. I went down the road of, I never got into any kind of devil worshiping or any of that thing, thank God, but I came very close. And I was convinced. I bought all these books on manifestation, and the guilt just began to pile up because, I read all these quirky books about if you could just connect to the energy of the universe, and you can heal her. So that put a tremendous amount of pressure on me because I felt in my own weakness, in my own mind, that it was my fault.
Yeah, you were failing. You were failing at whatever it is. Your role in all of this, obviously. Yeah.
That's right. I was failing in my role to heal her. God had abandoned me. Medicine had abandoned me.
Where's your wife in all of this? You're going nuts. You're going down this path. Is she following? Is she fighting? What is she doing?
my wife saw me changing, and she was scared to death. And every time she challenged me, of course, I became um, very defensive. So at the time, I began to drink, and I began to really get into these manifestation prayers and all these things, convinced that I was going to be able to do it, and went down that road. And she really got scared during this time. It was a frightening period for both of us. It was the darkest period of our 30-year marriage.
How long did it go?
That darkness probably lasted almost 2 years.
That'll test a marriage.
It will.
Is there a turning point?
There was a turning point. Melanie was from North Carolina, and we decided to move back there where we can have some of her family support. We had learned a lot of things in Los Angeles from holistic medicine. One of the things that we used to do all the time for Maria, actually, I'm the one that took the lead on it, is that because she would just pass whole foods and her digestive system didn't work, I would give her coffee enemas every Sunday to relieve her. And I'll never forget it, because this is when I can say that I really met the Lord and my life began to change. I was giving Maria a coffee enema one Sunday morning. It was a cold morning, and feeling very sorry for myself. And I was kneeling down in the tub, cleansing her with, all of this foul smell. And I began to cry, and I began to once again call out and say, God, where are you? And in that moment, I heard God speak to me in my spirit so clearly. And when I asked, where are you? And he spoke into my spirit and said, look at me. I'm right here. And I looked up at Maria, and I saw her face, and she had this incredibly vibrant, beautiful smile on her face. It was almost like she was glowing, like there was a light pouring through her. And I had my answer. It was the first time that I really believed in my heart that God existed. When I said, where are you? And he said, look at me, I'm right here. That was my turning point.
That's a wow moment.
That is the game changer moment. That was the game changer moment for me.
Not the place you expected to find God. Your daughter smiling. It's not how they write it in books. Not how they put it in the movies, is it?
No, rolling around. I mean, literally, in her feces and in the stink and down in the gutter is where I found my relationship with God. What
changed initially?
Well, initially what had changed is I began to crawl out of the darkness, and I began to pray again. I opened my Bible again. I began to search for things. And what happened to me was, prior to the experience of cleansing Maria, I had met a Franciscan priest on a plane, actually, in L.A. I was flying from L.A. to Chicago, and he sat down across from me and at the gate while I was waiting for my flight, and he had this lei around his neck. And I just chuckled to myself, I was very sarcastic and angry, because this is when I was still in L.A. But I looked at him and I said, so tell me, what do you guys do when God doesn't answer your prayers?
That's a great question. That's beautiful.
He looked at me. I know he was thinking, oh my goodness, who's this guy? So then we started to board the flight, and he never really answered. And, lo and behold, there happened to be an empty seat in my row. And here he comes, with a cup of coffee, and he says, hey, can I sit here? We began to talk. In the book, he wants to remain anonymous, but so he moved out of his seat. He was in the back of the plane, and he came walking up and
So that was a
found me.
sign to him. You were a sign. That guy needs me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He began to email me, and we began to talk and develop a relationship. And then before I knew it, when I moved back to North Carolina, he started to come down. He came down to my home, and he blessed my home, and we blessed Maria. Sometimes he brought some youth from the church to be with Maria, and they brought their instruments and to see her. And I began to again, crawl out of that darkness and see that there was maybe some hope, and I began to restore my faith a bit. So that was kind of like the beginning of my journey back. And my dear friend the Rev, who I'm still very close to today, and who's in the book a lot. I owe a lot to him. So he reached out and pulled me up. So in 2016, I had a massive heart attack. They rushed me to the hospital. Thank God the hospital in my little town is only 3 miles from my house. It was there that they could not resuscitate me. I flatlined and I was dead for 20 minutes.
20 minutes should bring about a lot of brain damage.
It's interesting that you say that because so many of the doctors had told me that. As a matter of fact, when they tried to resuscitate me, there was an Indian doctor, a beautiful young Indian woman by the name of Dr. Patel, who refused to give up on me. I mean, there was so much damage done to my heart, I immediately went into a 4-day coma. And during that period, there were several doctors that were coming in to see if I were brain dead. And on the 4th day, they told my wife, we've essentially run out of time. We're gonna take the tube out. I was intubated, and if he breathes on his own, we'll see what we have. If he lives. So they started to pull the tube out, and I began coughing, and here I am. But when I woke up, my heart was completely destroyed. And there began the journey of seeking a new heart, seeking a heart transplant. My heart was gone. So from there, they had put in a port in my chest and dripping medicine on my heart and a defibrillator. I had to wear all of these things until I got to Chicago. I went through a very, very difficult period for 2 months. I went everywhere to try to get a heart. Couldn't get a heart.
So you still had your original heart keeping things going, but it's getting a lot of help to keep it going.
Oh, it was getting an awful lot of help. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And 4 months later, my donor heart arrived, and I was transplanted. So I have a very young heart in me, a 20-year-old heart. So while in Chicago, waiting for my heart, my body collapsed a second time, even with the experimental pump that was in me and everything that had happened. I was so weak. My body had atrophied. I'm about 174 pounds. I had gone down to about 138. So I was on my way out once again. Once again, I screamed out to the Lord to help me. And when I did that, I said, "Do with me what you will." One night during a storm, a really big storm, and I was on the 8th floor of the hospital facing Lake Michigan. And it felt like I was in the middle of this storm. These clouds were forming and just sheets of rain were smashing up against the window. And I had I called it in the book, Into the Darkness. I went back into the darkness. And it was almost like, the tempter was baiting me with all of my past mistakes and guilt and shame and all of these things. And in an attempt to just weaken me further. And it worked. And I just, I got to the point where I just called out to the Lord to do with me what you will. I didn't want to live anymore. And in that moment, it's hard to explain because there really isn't language for it, but I was taken to a place that I call the ethereal. And wasn't it wasn't heaven. I didn't see Jesus Christ. That's not what I experienced. Instead, God chose to show me concepts instead of Jesus himself. And I was very disappointed about that, by the way. That's not what I had thought that I would encounter.
Were you disappointed after the fact or in the midst of it?
I was, when I was in that place, I was disappointed. And, as I began to, and it took me 3 years to reconcile this. It took me 3 years to write the book because it was very difficult for me. And ironically, it's the shortest chapter in the book because it was difficult for me to reconcile all of this. But then, the more I thought about it, I said, who am I? Who am I to have those kind of expectations? I mean, God is God, and God will show me what He wants to show me.
Okay, tell us. I'll ask some more questions about it afterwards, but tell us what you did experience. What were you seeing, feeling, hearing, whatever was going on?
It was kind of in that moment when I was, let's just say, taken up, or the veil pulled back. It felt like I found myself inside a shapeless, formless vacuum of sorts, an unending, infinite vastness. I was everywhere at once, like I was made of sand, and someone picked me up and threw the grains of my being into a strong wind, scattering me across an infinite, timeless universe. And I saw what looked like a hologram of my body in my green hospital gown, suspended in space, while at the same time looking down and seeing my broken, atrophied body in the same gown lying in my bed connected to the heart pump. And in that place, I understood, I wholly understood without explanation that God was speaking into my spirit. And when I understood what was happening, I heard things like, I am the power behind all things. I am the origin of all. This is divine source. This is your real identity. And, none of the pain in my body followed me into that place. There was, the pump and the machine, the wires coming out of my body, no tubes, nothing. All the IVs were gone. I was just standing in the middle of nowhere. And the five senses had no functionality there in the place where I was. There was no smell, no taste, no touch.
And it wasn't like a dream.
Was not like a dream.
No. It was real. It was happening. This was something totally. You could look at yourself in that hospital bed, be these grains of sand, and it all kind of made sense.
The knowledge of how the universe worked was understood in a flash. It was as if complex mathematical equations were hanging in the air around me with their solutions. I said to myself, wow, the nature of the universe and the laws that govern it they're so simple and elegant. And all I have to do while I'm here is just observe, and all my questions are already answered. It was like, I understood that this had to be how God designed it, because it was so simple. That everything was created from the same ingredients, same formula, all people, all creatures, everything animate, inanimate, everything is one. Everything was connected. We just manifest differently. And I thought, well, this is the only way the creator could have designed it. It's kind of like one recipe, right?
We're all made of the same stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've come to understand. Then what happened to me was very interesting. Which is what the book is named after. I saw and simultaneously became part of what looked like a gigantic web that covered the earth and stretched into infinity. And the only way that I can explain what that web looked like is that it was made of trillions of neurons in a vast interactive network that binds us all. And I somehow knew that each neuron represented a life, and that each life had this tiny quark of light inside its nucleus. And these kind of like neurons, the dendrites, tentacles, they were all entwined, and they were weaving together this beautiful tapestry of twinkling lights that hung on the ceiling of the universe. And I realized that in that moment that each one of those lights represented a life.
A human life.
A human life. Some parts of that web were darker than others, and some parts were brighter than others. But while in that place, I suddenly felt both exposed and free, and realized that there was no place to hide my actions, good or bad, in the universe. And I guess what that was God telling me, it doesn't matter what you do, good or bad. I know what it is. I already know. And there was a universal conversation taking place that I understood. There was an unspoken language that all of creation could understand. And I feel that language was one of acceptance, unity, and love.
We'll take a quick break right here and get back to part 2 of Rob's story, which includes a life review and a conversation with his daughter while having this experience. It was back in episode 78. I was talking to our guest that week, Pam Bongiorno, and she was giving me her story, but then later she would support us on Patreon, but she said something kind of interesting back in episode 78. This is what she said.
Trapper, do you really only have 61 Patreons?
Yeah, we're in the 63, 60. It kind of bounces around the 60s usually. It's been high as...
That's all?
Well,
I thought you would have thousands, seriously.
Well, we have thousands of people who listen, but they don't necessarily help it, financially. But I'm thrilled that they're listening. That's good. That's good,
Well, I tell all my friends about you. So.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for just jumping on Patreon here. I noticed you just joined up and everything, and thank you so much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, any chance I get to see you or talk to you, I'll do it.
All right. Thanks, Pam. Yeah, we do stay connected. We have monthly Zoom calls, and just put up a behind-the-scenes video of how we kind of put this all together up there. So, yeah, we do try to keep this all connected. And I'm happy to report, Pam, that we're up to 120 Patreon supporters now, and you can help us out. If these episodes are more than just entertainment to you, if they have an impact on your faith and your faith journey and would like to support us, any dollar amount, doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Whatever that is, whatever's right for you is right for us. You can go to patreon.com, search for Trapper Jack, or just come here to episode 145 at touchedbyheaven.net. We not only want your support, but need your support. We have plans in this ministry of growing this, and we do need your support to make it all happen, as you're making it happen now. So thank you so much for that. All right, so let's get back to Rob. Rob Gentile, his book, Quarks of Light, available mid-February 2021, Amazon and other places where fine books are sold. Quarks of Light, Rob Gentile, part 2 now, here at Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. Often we hear about life reviews during near-death experiences. Yours is a very unique near-death, but they all are. But they have, nobody says, "Hey, I had the exact same experience." God's a pretty creative guy. But in terms of life review, did you get one of those?
I did. What was interesting about that, Trapper, is that as I became aware of myself, kind of looking down at my body in my hospital bed, the most interesting thing that happened to me was in terms of this life review, because there's more, but I began to observe the nurses on my floor who had been caring for me and coming in and out of patients' rooms. And it was like I was looking at multiple television screens at once, with their lives playing out in front of me like a trailer to a movie. And it struck me that I was only seeing nurses that I had made negative assumptions about. And I found it interesting that their lives were being shown to me in kind of like a regression of events, like the film was going backward at high speed from present day to childhood. It was like watching how the old cartoons were created. The artist would draw each stage of a character's development on a separate page and then start flipping through it. And you could see that character come to life. And what was crazy to me is that every time there was a watershed event, either good or bad, it stopped for a second. And anytime something destructive happened, abuse by another, or bad personal choices, or circumstances out of their control, it all had contributed to who they were, revealing a portrait of who that person was in that moment. And I felt these overwhelming feelings of collective pain and suffering became part of me. It was kind of like the weight of all of this seemed to darken my spirit, and I felt it. And then, curiously enough, I was shown my own life path and my own mistakes and the things that I had felt, most shameful about. And I remember saying to myself, how could I have judged others so harshly? How could I have judged myself so harshly for my own shortcomings?
What a gift you were given. You got to see how they got to be what you were judging at that point. What was the end of the road? You got to see it.
Exactly. I got to see it.
You got to see why they were the way they were. Absolutely. What a gift.
It was, Trapper, and it showed me how destructive judging someone is. I mean, that was the lesson there. We don't know what someone else has gone through, and to judge them. And like I say, it was only God only showed me the nurses that I had made these negative assumptions about, which I found to be very curious.
Oh, it's so perfect, though. It's so God.
Yeah, it is.
It's so God. The other ones are like, you like them. I don't have to show you that. I'm going to show you these other people that you're going to love after you see how they got there and what they've been dealing with. And because you had a sudden appreciation for that newfound knowledge and how they got to where they are. More empathy, right?
Exactly. It was kind of like, like you said, to your point, he didn't show me the beautiful people. Why show me them? He showed me what these folks, that they had just as much value and they were just as important as anyone else, and that God loved them all, mistakes and all. And the most incredible part of my experience, and I hope I can get through this without breaking down, is that I saw my daughter. And she was perfect. And she was whole. And I spoke to her. There is no, at least my experience was, there's no language there that you and I can hear. It's language to me. What I experienced there was, it's almost like it's felt and it's absorbed. It's almost like telepathy in a way. And I saw Maria, and she had this light coming through her. Her eyes were filled with light, not the kind of light that we see in the natural world, but a spirit of light that animates all life. And she had this knowing smile on her face. And I recognized that smile straight away, because it was a smile that in our darkest moments together, all of her pain and suffering, somehow she was always able to smile, almost like, hey, you can't touch the best part of me. And I spoke to her and I said, Maria, please speak to me. I have never heard your voice. I don't know anything about your personality. I just want to hear you say one time, I love you, Daddy. And I said, we've taken you everywhere. We've tried to heal you. I don't know what to do when you're having seizures. How do I comfort you? And she replied back to me and she said, just love me. 3 words. That's it. Just love me. And, you know, when she said that, it was the first time in my life I had felt free, forgiven, unburdened. And I spoke into the vastness, and I heard my own voice echo back at me that I never want to leave this place. And when that happened, I was back in my bed. I heard the pump. I felt my body, rocking from every heartbeat from the pump. And I realized that where I was and what happened to me in that moment. That was the end of however long that was. I found in that place that what I understood in that place was that time didn't exist, and that. But what was curious to me, I did not see the future. I did not worry about the future. I saw the past. I saw the present, but the future was hidden. And I think that's because the future is so much created by our own actions in our life, our own will, our own choices. God's all about free will. I learned that. He's not going to take that away. So we can create a future. I mean, it's always going to be God's will in the end, but we have responsibility for our own actions and what we're going to do with our life. And I'm convinced that that's why I didn't see the future.
Seeing your daughter whole, when you say that, do you fully mean that she seemed differently whole, or was it as she is, but there was a level of communication there that you just didn't have before with her?
I knew in that place that she was whole in a different way. I mean, there she was standing in the middle of nowhere. Rett syndrome girls have this curse of constantly writhing and wringing their hands. She can't use her hands, so she just writhes them constantly. But her hands were by her side. She looked like a normal child, just standing there, full of light. And she was different. When I say she was whole, she was physically whole too, not just spiritually whole.
Right. When you come back with Just Love Me, how does that change your relationship with Maria?
Well, it took away all of that guilt that I was responsible 100% for healing her. Now, don't get me wrong. This is where I think we can go down a slippery slope. This is where I think it can get sticky, because I believe that prayers have power when they're followed by action. And what I mean by that is that I can sit on my knees all day long and pray that Maria gets well. But if I don't feed her the right foods and take her to the right doctors and do the right things for her, it's not going to happen. So I think that's what free will is all about. But what that changed in me is that when she said, "Just love me," I realized that this is how God expresses himself through us, through love. I mean, love, and I came to understand that God and love and light are all one. And I just felt unburdened when she said that. I knew in my heart that I did everything that I could do. I'll continue to do everything that I can do for her. But it's just love me encompasses so many things. And, we know from the Bible that it covers a multitude of sins, if you want to call them sins. But to me, love, she was trying to communicate to me that love is the crux of all of it, and of who we are, and of God.
And what a gift again. What a gift this whatever time frame that is, obviously outside of time. What a gift, all of this.
It really was.
But you needed it. God gave you exactly what you needed.
Oh, precisely what I needed. Absolutely.
Do you find afterwards, when you come back and you went through all of this, does patience improve? And I mean, we are who we are. We're always kind of battling ourselves and our own personalities. And whatever the norm is for us. But did you take a leap in patience and judgment and lack of judgment?
I did. Like you say, we're human. We all struggle with it. I struggled when I came back after I got my heart. I had to be honest with you, I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be there in that place, in the ethereal, full of love and light, where my daughter was whole and where I felt connected and one with everything. In that place, I talk about it in the book. I realized that if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I loved, the light would spread. And we could practice that on earth. And that's one of the things that the Holy Spirit told me to share and to write this book. But I went through that period of not wanting to be here. And I had gone to several churches there in Chicago and talked to different pastors about it because I had such a difficult time dealing with, being back in the temporal world. I mean, after being in that place, who would want to be here, right? But I knew that I had to come back. I had a purpose. God wanted me to tell my story, take care of my daughter, get her safely to the other side, and my wife. So I had to come back. But I for about a year, I didn't want to be here. And there was a moment that I had a turning point in that as well that brought me out of that mode. Thank goodness. I finally threw my hands up in the air, and I remember I went to talk to a pastor, a Chinese pastor, very interesting. And he came to see me. He came, and we were sitting out on the front porch of my apartment, and I told him what I was struggling with. And I said, his name is Pastor Mann, and I said, Pastor Mann, you're gonna think this is really selfish, but I said, I just don't want to be here anymore. I feel guilty about getting a heart when so many people on my floor died waiting for a heart. Young kids need a heart. All of these things. And Pastor Mann just kind of looked out onto the street for a while, and he looked back to me and he said, the solution to your problem is very simple. I said, how's that? And he said, you don't know where you belong yet because you're fat in the spirit, having been fed too much during your spiritual journey.
You're fat in the spirit.
Yeah, you're fat in the spirit, he said. A Chinese man, really funny. They have a great way of putting things. And he said, to get thin again, I want you to give back to God in all your works by serving others. He said, the divine nature will begin to express itself through the gifts of the Spirit, kindness, faith, goodness, respect, love. And he said, serving others will take away all your guilt about getting a heart and being here. And then he said, which was my turning point, he said, you don't have to leave the earth to experience the divine.
Heaven on earth. Isn't that what that's what we all want, isn't it? Heaven on earth.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I'll never forget, he left, and I was still very tender. It was hard for me to walk more than a couple of miles, but I took a long walk, and I kept those words kept on ringing through my ears. You don't have to leave the earth to experience the divine. And it was then, Trapper, that I began to see things for the first time, not just look at things, but to see things. It may sound trite and overused, but I really began to look at nature for the first time and see it for what it was, and see the magnificence and of a flower and how what a miracle it is. I saw those things, and I still do, even though with time some of that fades. Those words come back to me when I feel like things are going a little bit gray, and I need to reconnect with nature and reconnect with the world, because it is all here in front of us. There's miracles all over the place in nature, in us being able to have this conversation, in the simple things, enjoying a good cup of coffee. I mean, it's the simple things, and I had to learn that the hard way, and that was my turning point. I left the ethereal behind. I'm looking forward to getting back there, but while I'm here, I want to enjoy it and talk about this love and light that I experienced, which we need right now. We need unity.
I think I heard that you had a second experience as well.
The first experience was at the hospital when I had flatlined. 7 weeks prior to me having my heart attack is when unfortunately my wife's brother had committed suicide, and in his parents' home. He had suffered from anxiety. He had a terrible, terrible anxiety disorder, and of course the doctors put him on a lot of drugs, and one thing led to another, but his nickname was Frosty. But what happened to me is that when I was in the ER, right before I flatlined and Dr. Patel rushed in, and there was another nurse there that witnessed it, I was out completely, and all of a sudden I sprang up on the gurney and I screamed out his name, Frosty, and I fell back on the gurney, and my wife was there and the nurse was there. It was almost like my wife said, somebody picked me up or grabbed me by my collar and just pulled me forward off the gurney. And I just fell backwards and collapsed. And then, bing, that's when code blue rang out and everybody came rushing in. When I came out of my 4-day coma, I told my wife, she came over to my bed and she said, you called out my brother's name, Frosty, right before you coded what happened. And I said, Frosty came to me. And he said to me, I made a big mess out of things. You need to go back and help clean things up and tell my family I'm in a good place. So my wife said, oh my God, only my brother would have said that, because he was always making a mess of things. And she said, when you screamed his name, I was screaming out to you saying, no, 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 don't go to Frosty. Don't go to the other side.
Don't go to the light. Don't go to the light. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But what a message to be able to bring that back to the family. Another wonderful gift.
That was a beautiful gift that it was really one of the only things that gave, my mother-in-law and father-in-law any solace that Frosty was in a good place. And, being raised Catholic, is maybe they've changed the rules, but
I can tell you already they have. Years ago, suicide used to be considered, you're going to hell. It's not anymore.
That was a mortal sin.
In the end, it doesn't mean you're going to hell. We don't know what people's mental state is. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier, who are we to judge? Who are we to judge anything? Nothing, well, including that act.
Exactly.
We don't encourage it. We certainly don't, nobody encourages that kind of action, but we can't judge it. You just can't. How much of an argument do you have with people over the title Quarks of Light? I told my wife, she went, quarks? And I went, yeah, I know it's a science thing and it's a tiny thing. And I thought it had something to do with light itself or out there in the stars. I couldn't remember what a quark was either. Describe quark.
You've actually hit on some of that there. Quarks of light, they're the fundamental essence of all creation. When you break down an atom, the smallest building blocks, the smallest elements of creation are quarks. And all matter is made of light. Ancient religious scriptures throughout human history have associated light with divine consciousness and intelligence, from which everything has originated. And science is now proving that light is the cornerstone of physics and natural law. And these particles, these quarks, when broken down, they combine and have a variety of intrinsic properties that create infinite possibilities. And this was kind of like what I was telling you, how God uses the same recipe. And those unique combinations determine whether something is going to be a tree or a person. So that's where the title comes from, Quarks of Light, because what I saw in the web is that each neuron, that nucleus, had this spark of light in it, a quark of light.
What haven't we said? What haven't we touched on? How you want to close this, Rob?
I'd like to tell you the two most important messages that I've gleaned from my experience. The most important message I received was that our real identity comes from God. And I think that a lot of people have forgotten that. And when I went through that, whole period of self-manifestation and reading all those books and trying to heal my daughter, I realized the hard way that no matter how long I meditated and no matter what I did, I couldn't create a bowl of chocolate ice cream, okay? So we cannot create anything. Only God can create. And the second most important lesson that I received when I was in the ethereal was one of unity and oneness, that we are all connected. The web that I saw, made of quirks of light, as a whole represents the epic light and dark struggle of all of humanity in every age. Those dark parts of the web that I saw are where human beings were not emanating light, whether that was through sin, what we want to call sin, or violent acts, or any time we disconnect ourselves from God's irreproachable light. Anytime we disconnect ourselves from God's love and light, we go into that dark place. And those are the real main lessons that I wanted to convey.
That's a great way to cap this off, really. Again, in that conversation with God that you had out there on the beach, was it?
It was.
What a conversation starter. And he answered you.
Yeah, he answered me.
And best of luck with the book, Quarks of Light, by Rob, and you pronounce it Gentile?
Yes, Rob A. Gentile. The subtitles are, it's Quarks of Light, a near-death experience, what I saw that opened my heart.
Beautiful. God's response to angry prayers, love. I thought it interesting. I thought Maria saying to Dad, just love me, ultimately is really what Rob was saying to God in his angry prayers. Just love me, show me, do something. And he did. He responded with tremendous love, helped with so much grace that Rob was able to change. There have been such incredible changes, not in the situation, but in Rob. Just beautiful. The book, again, is called Quarks of Light by Rob Gentile, available mid-February 2021, Amazon and other fine locations where fine books are sold. It's also here at episode 145. There's a link to keep you informed. Stay informed is what it says, so we can send you on a weekly basis other Touched by Heaven stories that are out there I think you might want to know about. This is also the place, 145, where you can click through and help us out at patreon.com. We appreciate that. Lily Phillips, you're our official shout-out this week. Thank you so much, Lily, for helping us out on a monthly basis through Patreon. All right. How about we do this again next week? Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. See you then. I'm Trapper Jack.